Hello, everyone. Welcome to Locals Supporting Locals, the heartbeat of the Okanagan, with host Kevin Proteau, featuring a special guest each week to discuss current political challenges and, more importantly, solutions. Kevin, what is our topic this evening?
Good evening, and thank you very much, Vicki. Tonight we're discussing GMO issues, genetically modified organisms, as well as saving farmlands here in BC. And if we still have time, we're going to get into the potential changes to the seed regulations that the Canadian Food Inspection Agency is trying to implement. And tonight we're actually very fortunate to have with us a very progressive city council and city councillor here of the name of Harold Steeves. And with Harold, we're going to talk about Bill 24, the changes that they're trying to do with the agricultural land reserve. And Harold has been a city councillor now down in Richmond for 43 years. So I'll just give you a little background on him. He graduated from the University of British Columbia with a bachelor degree of science in agriculture, specifically in genetics. Harold was also a member of the Legislative Assembly in BC under the Dave Barrett New Democratic Party government from 1972 to 75. He operated his family ranch at Cass Creek for 30 years and is a hardcore activist against GMOs. So welcome to the show, Harold.
Hi, good to be here.
Yes, thank you for joining us here. So I know I couldn't include all your credits here, but you also have extensive knowledge on the seed regulations and what they're trying to implement as well, eh?
That's right. We actually our family were the first seed growers in British Columbia. We had the first seed catalog out in 1880. So we've maintained heirloom seeds for the past 100 or so years.
Wow.
So you definitely got a background in what we're about to talk about then.
Yeah, sure have. Yeah, no GMOs back then.
Yeah, no kidding, eh? Well, how long has GMOs been in for people out there that are just tuning in and just getting familiar with GMOs? How long has GMOs been out there?
Only about 50 years. It was about the mid-'90s they started making them publicly available. They were experiments from the late 80s, early 90s. I guess they were doing experiments, and by about the mid-'90s, Monsanto and some of the companies were growing GMOs in farms, and then they just spread like wildfire in the prairies and the areas where they grow large acreages of monoculture corn and soy and things like that.
Well, it's something that we had talked about there that you guys had done in the City of Richmond there is you guys actually banned the use of pesticides and herbicides in the City of Richmond, right?
Yes, we actually Richmond's got a long history of destroying farmland through rezonings for decades. But 20 years ago, the council changed dramatically, and we have been preserving our agricultural lands and working with ways to improve agriculture. And one of the ways that we came up with was to get rid of the herbicides and the pesticides being sprayed on people's lawns and gardens, and also GMOs. So we passed bylaws banning the use of cosmetic pesticides in Richmond. It doesn't ban them on farm fields, on the farms, but just in the urban areas, and where people in the farms if you're using them, I guess, in your lawn. And then we followed in with a ban on the GMOs, because the only reason for the GMO crops that are prevalent in the market right now is to use these herbicides and pesticides on them. So we banned both. The end result has been fantastic.
Yeah. So what was the feeling like with the citizens of Richmond and some of the smaller farmers, bigger farmers, with what you were trying to do? Was there a lot of resistance, or how did it work out?
The only resistance came from Monsanto. We took it up with the Agriculture Advisory Committee, which is composed of farmers, And there were some farmers opposed to the bylaw because, unbeknownst to us, there were already 3 dairy farms growing GMO corn. And of course, as I said, it just swept across the continent when they brought the GMOs in for corn and soy and some of those crops. So what we did is we red circled those 3 farms and GMO corn and said, okay, we won't ban cow corn, it's here already, but we'll ban everything else. And so we then no longer had any opposition from the farmers. The day or two before we had our public hearing, our city council got a call from CropLife in Alberta, which is the front group for Monsanto, that they were sending their vice president out to Richmond to explain to us the error of our ways so that we wouldn't pass this bylaw.
Sorry, I can't help but laugh on that one.
That was our opposition. So anyway, our mayor is a lawyer and doesn't take kindly to people coming to tell him what to do. So I told Mayor Brody, I said, Monsanto is coming to tell you how to vote. And he said, who's Monsanto? And walked in and basically told him to go back to Alberta. But that was the opposition. It passed our council unanimously, and it has worked incredibly well.
Well, it's funny you say that, for the mayor to actually, because this was just within the past year you guys did this, right?
This was about 3 years ago that we did most of it, over the past 2 or 3 years. This particular past year, we actually started a new program last year. Actually 2 years ago, we started collecting the yard waste, all the leaves and the lawn clippings from all the residential areas of Richmond. And last year, we sat down with Harvest Power, which is a company in Richmond that composts all of this yard waste, had the yard waste tested for herbicides and pesticides, and found that the yard waste in Richmond is clean and pure,
Amazing.
Good enough for organic gardens and organic farms. And that's what we're about to do next.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, no, what I meant was it's funny and almost alarming to a degree, where the mayor actually didn't know who Monsanto was.
Oh no, he knew who Monsanto was. It was his way of brushing them off. In other words, Monsanto, they're not going to tell me what to do. Monsanto is the biggest corporation in the world.
Well, we need more politicians like that can stand their ground. It doesn't matter, who they are, what corporation, or who they think they are. And that's essentially what's happened. Is a lot of integrity has been lost in our local governments, provincial and federal governments. Where integrity doesn't come first anymore. Corporations come first.
That's correct. If Monsanto hadn't have tried to interfere, my mayor probably wouldn't have come out so strongly in favor of what we were doing. With the big corporation coming to tell little old Richmond what to do, that got him going.
That's fantastic. Yeah, so anyway, I know you were saying there with the garden waste. So, you were also saying because I guess because a lot of monocropping, is that what turned a lot of the farmlands acidic?
That's correct. Now, in British Columbia, we don't have as much monoculture as other areas in the world, and that's largely because of the agricultural land reserve, which is another story. But we still have a lot of crops now that, for the past 50 years, have not had compost and manures on them because we've gone away from mixed farming. You used to have a dairy farm, and you'd have your manures from the cows you'd put on the fields, and you'd work it into the rotation system. Well, the dairy farms now are concentrated into huge farms in the interior of BC and elsewhere around the province. And most of the farms in the lower Fraser Valley, for example, are now simply market gardens, blueberries, cranberries, and vegetables. Well, you don't do much crop rotation there, and you don't get much manures and compost to put in the fields. So we come up with the idea all the compost materials that are being thrown away by people could be put in the fields. So we're composting it. And we're starting our first project this spring with 2 of the farmers in Richmond who are going to be putting very large amounts of this, what was garden waste, on their fields as compost to revitalize those fields.
That is so fantastic. And I often ask that question up here in the Okanagan. Who dropped the ball with the RDOS to allow so much monocropping to take place? Because without the biodiversity, when you have biodiversity, I should say, there's no need for all these pesticides because you got all your predators. You know, the circle of life, as you just pointed out there.
That's correct. If you've got really rich soil, then you have much healthier plants, and the bugs and the diseases don't hit them as hard, and that gives time for the friendly insects to kill off the bad ones. And so generally you don't have problems with insect pests or with diseases as long as you've got healthy soil and healthy plants. And as long as you don't have vast acreages of those particular crops, and as long as you don't plant the same crop in the same soil for 50 years, which is what happens in California and Mexico. So they need all these chemicals. We don't need them if we get back to crop rotations. And
that's it. And essentially where and please correct me if I'm wrong, because I am not a farmer. I was just a very concerned citizen once I discovered that I had osteoarthritis in both my knees, no cartilage in one and very little in the other one, and the doctor told me that I needed 2 artificial knees. And my mother coincidentally has 2 artificial knees, and I saw what she went through, and I didn't want to go through that, so I politely told the doctor where to go and how to get there, and I went on my quest naturally. And at that time, the movie Food Inc. had just come out, and so I started to watch and see what was happening to farming. And I went to we got a Whole Foods market up here in Penticton. It's individually owned. It's not part of the big chain. And I picked up these biodense frozen raw organic cubes that were actually being made here in Kelowna, so right next door. And they were doing their sampling. They do that at the last Wednesday of every month here in Penticton here, and you get 20% off. So that's when everybody's featuring their products. And it put me onto disability. I could barely walk anymore because of how I was feeling with my knees. I could sit there and my knees would throb, And so I started taking these pills, natural health pills that ease the pain a little bit. But I took these cubes because it contained spinach, kale, hemp, bok choy, flax, you name it, it was in there. And and they're all certified organics. And if I had to purchase that, it would have cost me a fortune, not to mention how long it lasts in the fridge, et cetera, et cetera. So I ended up taking these cubes, and it's very difficult, I got to tell you, to apply these cubes, because what you got to do is you take the cube, it's a frozen cube from the bag, take it, put it into a glass of water, and go about your business for 20 minutes, and then you come back and you drink it. Anyways, to make a long story short here, after a month of taking these frozen cubes, I landed up, I was able to jog again.
Yeah, well, we're getting all kinds of vitamins and minerals and trace elements that aren't in the food today, and antioxidants, simply because, A, it was healthy food without chemical sprays on it that actually make your health worse, and B, because it was probably grown in much healthier soils that contain the trace elements that the plant needs to pass on to you. There was a study done in tomatoes some time ago, and one of the things we grow on our farm is tomatoes. And the person that did the study discovered that a tomato today that you buy in the store, a field tomato from California or Mexico, has 50% of the nutrient value of a tomato 50 years ago, before the so-called Green Revolution began. However, it has got twice as much water and twice as much starch. So you're eating this tomato, and the starch adds to obesity, but you have to eat twice as many tomatoes to get the same nutrient value as we got 50 years ago. So what is new and bright and clean and has no blemishes in fruit and vegetables today may not be as healthy for you as a tomato that's a little more smaller and not as rosy and appetizing as the ones that are designed for trucking 3,000 miles.
No kidding. And that's what I discovered, that my true, where my pharmacy is actually at, is my farmer. Who is my pharmacist is or I should say the farmland, and my pharmacist is actually the farmer. because at the end of the day, a lot of people have forgotten that, that food is your medicine, and all these either natural health products, supplements that you're taking, or what they've created in the pharmaceutical world of synthetic health products, so-called health products, are all derived from food.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
The other thing I'd like to tell you about tomatoes, and the younger people won't know, but some of the older ones will, that the interior of British Columbia, the Kamloops region, used to be the tomato capital of Canada at one time, about 50 years ago. All along the Thompson River and the Fraser River, all along that bench land, they used to pump water up onto those benches and grow tomatoes. The climate is fantastic for it. The soils are great. All they needed was water. The big problem, of course, is they got undercut from cheap tomatoes being trucked from California and Mexico, and eventually went out of business. But I remember going to a conference in Kamloops one time when I first got elected to Richmond Council around 1969, when at the dinner of the municipal convention, they provided the first serving was beefsteak. It was beefsteak tomatoes, a great big slab of tomato. They were so proud of it. And that's all lost. But
wow.
We could do it again.
I have a question, Harold. I remember I used to actually work for a MP and an MLA back in the early 90s. And so I remember when Monsanto's name was sort of uttered and the things that they were applying for with Health Canada. But you've got a long memory, and you've been with this for so long. Like, what has been the evolution of GMOs in the last 20 years? Because I seem to remember that every piece of information that they applied with, the promises that were made, none of them actually came true.
Basically, that's the story of Monsanto. Even before they did GMOs, the things they said 30, 40, and 50 years ago didn't come true either. Basically, this is a company that's main reason for existence is to produce chemicals, primarily actually for chemical warfare in World War II. They produced the Agent Orange that was used in Vietnam. They told everybody that it was safe. I remember in 1969 on our farm, there's the dikes in Richmond, goes right through our farm, and the city sprayed our dikes with Agent Orange. They just called it brush killer at the time. And kids were out there picking the blackberries and eating them after it was sprayed. Well, it killed a couple of our cows. One aborted and died a very miserable death. And the vet said, I can't prove it, but I think it's been sprayed. I got the council to put signs up warning people don't eat the berries, but the mayor of the day said it's perfectly safe. It's just brush killer. Well, we found out it was a deadly poison. And the Vietnam vets 2 years ago won a settlement of about $180 million from Monsanto and some of the companies that produced it during the Vietnam War, because they told the armed forces that were putting the sprays down that it was safe, and it wasn't. So that's the history of Monsanto. And what they've done is they've developed other sprays for agricultural crops that they've also told us were safe, and we found out in later years that they're not. Roundup, for example, they told us could be used on organic gardens because you spray it on the crop, it kills the weeds, and what doesn't land on the weeds washes off into the soil. It unites with the soil, and it disappears magically. Well, we found out now that it doesn't. And that it's still in the soil, and in certain conditions, it'll come back and kill something else later on.
Yeah.
And we have no idea what it does to our human cells when it's a residue on the food we eat. And that leads us to the GMOs, because the GMOs are designed to withstand Roundup. You can spray it on the food.
I seem to recall Monsanto at the time promising the Canadian government and promising the world, basically, that there was going to be less pesticide use with GMO crops. There was going to be more, bigger yields, and they were making these kinds of promises. And yet those didn't come true, and yet we're still allowing them to exist.
As a matter of fact, they not only didn't come true, the exact opposite is happening. What any geneticist like myself could have told them, in fact we did tell them, and we've been saying it for decades, is that when you selectively go after a certain weed or plant species, some plants or animals will survive, and they will breed and reproduce, and you end up with a crop that's resistant to Roundup. Well, that's what's happened. And so now there are some 30 or 40 different weed varieties across Canada and the United States that are resistant to Roundup. So guess what they're doing? They're taking part of Agent Orange, the 2,4-D, which is one of the chemicals of Agent Orange, and experimenting with that to develop crops to put the 2,4-D on the crops. Well, again, these are really deadly poisons. After 2,4-D comes 2,4,5-T, and they haven't got anything stronger. So what happens is they're going to keep on breeding more of these resistant weeds. So effectively, they've nullified the reason for their existence. But they're putting in 10 times as much chemicals on the land now as they did before they started.
And more resistant pests, I understand.
Yeah, the pests are resistant. There's corn borers now that are resistant to BT. BT actually was used in organic gardens if you sprayed it on by hand in a little bit, and that worked. But when you have a crop where you have a cornfield that's designed for BT and you spray vast acreages of it, there's bound to be some pests in there that are going to survive. If you're just hand spraying a few little plants, one or two at a time, you get them all. But when you're doing large acreages, there will be some survive, and pretty soon you've got genetic traits in the bug system that are resistant to BT. So it's an unending problem, and the solution to the problem is to get away from GMOs and chemical agriculture all the way, and it can be done.
One more
thing. Go ahead, Vicki.
One more thing. I recall reading, and I hope I wasn't dreaming, but I recall reading recently that there was a farmers organization a big farmers organization in the prairies that was actually GMO farmers that were actually rethinking GMOs because they've realized it isn't saving them money.
I don't know about an organization doing it, but I know a number of farmers are trying to get out of it that are using GMOs. Because the other thing that happened about GMOs is that when you modify a type of corn, for example, to withstand bugs, it doesn't necessarily mean that's the most productive kind. And they're finding some of the GMO crops aren't as productive as varieties of corn that are not modified. And so you're not going to necessarily increase your production because you've selected a variety that the GMO modification works with that isn't necessarily the most productive variety that you could have. So they're finding there are varieties of crops that are more productive and produce more than the GMO crops. And it took the farmers a while to realize that, but it's simply a fact of life that some varieties of vegetables are more productive than others. It always have been.
That is, it's so sad, and I've seen some of the presentations that Monsanto puts on, as well as Codex Alimentarius, and they put up, big pictures of these beautiful looking tomatoes. It's all agriculture, and I could see how one could be taken in, as a farmer, as just a regular person. And it's very misleading what they've done. And once you've gone GMO, it's hard to go back. Essentially, what you got to do, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, you almost got to burn your field and start over again in order to get rid of the GMO infestation.
Yeah, and basically, if you've got GMO crops of a certain variety, you'd have to get rid of that crop completely. But that may be difficult to do as well, because in some crops, and this is now in corn and soy and some of those crops, the GMO contamination has spread to non-GMO crops because either the pollen is carried by bees or it's carried by wind, and it doesn't end at your fence line. So if you're growing GMOs on one side of the fence, the poor guy on the other side of the fence is going to have them in his field too. So it becomes even more difficult to eradicate them when they're grown in large, vast acreages in the prairies, for example. In smaller areas where just one farmer would be growing GMO corn and the others aren't, it wouldn't be too difficult to get rid of the GMOs. But in these areas where they have the vast acreages of monoculture, it's pretty hard to contain.
Well, I know, and that's what we're fortunate about here in BC. Even though there is genetic crops going on, we're nowhere close to what's happened in, for example, Alberta, Manitoba, Saskatchewan. Ontario, as far as I know, isn't as bad, but and hence why we got to do something about it now before it takes over, like it's done for those few other provinces. So, if you can tell us, Harold, there, like you said, you banned the use of pesticides and herbicides, and also, if I'm not mistaken here, you've also stopped the sale of seeds, GMO seeds, within the City of Richmond as well?
Yeah, that's right. Basically, local government has certain things that it can do and certain things it can't do. We cannot legally stop somebody from growing a GMO crop, and so we haven't tried to do that. We've said it's a ban. We say we don't want them grown, but we can't go and charge you for growing a GMO crop because that comes under the Health of Canada Act and the CFIA rules and regulations for the federal government. However, we can ban the sale of seeds that are genetically modified, and we found this out a couple of years ago. We had a problem with puppy mills providing dogs to the puppy stores and the pet stores in Richmond, and dogs and puppy mills are very poorly looked after and have a lot of problems. So we banned the sales of puppies in pet stores. We were taken to court and we won. Since then, we banned turtles because turtles were being released in the wild and different pets that create a nuisance when they're mixed in with our native populations, and we've done that quite successfully. So we know that we can ban the sale of goods, and that's in part of our forte as a city. We can't prevent you from growing it, but we can ban it from being sold in the community.
Yeah, well,
that's what we've done.
This is the part that I don't get here, Harold. You know, I mean, we see that corporations have infiltrated our Health Canada, our federal, our provincial governments, and like, how can we be more proactive to take these rights back? Because back in the day, local government had all the powers, you know, and now it seems to have swayed where it's the federal, you know. And I brought this up with the city of Penticton when we had our smart meter issue here, and I reminded the city council that you have an oath and a mandate to protect the health and the safety of the citizens of your community. So how can we somehow bring that up to where, you know what you've decided as a federal government or as a provincial government, I'm sorry, we cannot apply that here because you're breaking my oath that I've taken. Is that possible?
It's difficult, but it is possible. And actually, what we are doing is we're trying to do that with GMOs and with the cosmetic pesticides. What we have been doing is we've been telling people how successful it's been in Richmond, how we're now able to take the compost materials, put it back in the soils. We know that it's safe. We tell people what you put in your garden, what you put in your lawn is what you eat, and they're very good about it. And if every community did that, then regardless of what the federal government did, there'd be nobody planting GMOs in British Columbia. Now that's a tall order, but the UBCM has adopted a stand against GMOs in British Columbia, and I think some 60 or 70 city councils and municipal councils have also come out and taken a stand against GMOs. So that idea is growing, and what we're doing in Richmond is we're trying to show how successful it can be, and I think that's why we're on the leading edge on this issue. And we're now to the point where I've been on a speaking tour this spring, you know, telling people about it. I was up to Comox a month ago, and we're going to have a delegation from Comox coming down to see what we're doing. And eventually we're spreading the story. You can live without GMOs, you can increase your crop production without GMOs, and you're not going to be overrun with weeds and bugs. As simple as that.
Well, you see, and this is being solution-oriented, and this is what we got to get out there, because sadly, you know, the mainstream media is not reporting a lot on this. And hats off to the City of Richmond, like yourself and all the councillors, because I know you could just by yourself. And by all means, when you see the mayor the next time, I think you got to go to shake his hand for us, because it's fantastic. As you're showing that it can be done.
Yeah, I think that that's really all we can do. We can't overrule our federal government, but we can embarrass them into doing something about it eventually. Now, that said...
Well, I don't know. It doesn't seem to be working with them, so
yeah.
That's why we look at how we got to take the rights back to the local government again and use that health and safety mandates and oath that the local governments take and put it to the people. Do a vote asking that very question, and
no,
so
that's right.
Just my thoughts.
Yes, the night we adopted the GMO resolution opposing them, our City Hall Council chamber was packed. More people couldn't get in. We had 200 or 300 people in the hall and people standing out in the doorways. So it certainly had the support of the community. And I think that it's an issue that people are beginning to understand. People like yourself, that you quite often there's undetermined health issues as to why we are having all kinds of diseases and ailments that we didn't have before, and quite often it's a food issue. We don't know exactly what in our food that may be causing it, but we know that by not having nutritious food and by having food that may have some residues and chemicals on the food, probably has something to do with some of the diseases and some of the problems that we're having as human beings. So the cleaner and purer our food is, the better chance we've got.
And I think, Harold, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the problem, stems past even our federal government. I think even our federal government's hands are being more tied, and I don't mean to alarm people out there, but I mean, because I truly believe we can keep the power, or we can regain our power back at the local level. But it seems to me that corporations have gained so much power through the courts and through other systems that they really pull the protectionist card a lot of times now, and what we call sovereignty, the corporations call protectionism, and they fight that tooth and nail. For example, a Canadian mining company taking a third world country to court, or a second world country to court, because that second world country won't allow them to mine for gold in their rainforests, and so how we've allowed them somehow to get this kind of control, and it seems that it's even tying the hands of our own governments.
We've been at the local level. We've been fighting this for decades. I went to a conference, I guess, about 20 years ago, or actually a public hearing on international trade when they were trying to tie the hands of local government. And we insisted, if you want to tie the hands of yourselves, go ahead, but don't tie local government to having to buy in the international market. We'd like to buy from our own community, whether it's food goods or produced goods or whatever. We like to buy it to keep money circulating in our own economy. And we fought against that. I remember making a presentation to the one public hearing in Vancouver that I was at some years ago. But gradually they have taken away our rights to buy from our own citizens, and we are threatened from time to time with court action, even at the local level.
Right.
Richmond brought in a procurement bylaw about 5 years ago, and actually we were given an award. We got an award for it from the Sierra Club back in Ontario for being one of the better procurement policies. The corporations threatened to take us to court, so that's the difference. But they didn't.
Wow.
But we did, for example, we do try to buy food locally. Well, we passed a regulation for our own use in Richmond and for restaurants and that too. We wanted the restaurants that are run in facilities owned by the city, and there's only 2 or 3 of them, to buy local produce, and we passed some regulations to do that, which they've adhered to. But in the overall scheme of things, that's contrary to international trade rules. But because we're doing it on a small scale, we've gotten away with it. But if we've done it on a large scale, which we would like, and that leads us to the food security program I've been working on for Metro Vancouver, we would like local government and provincial governments and federal governments to buy local food, that's BC food or Alberta food, wherever you are, for all of their facilities, for your schools, your hospitals, your businesses that are under the control and operation of various levels of government. If they had a local procurement policy, we could make life much easier for our farm community, bring them a better income than what they're getting to have to continue to export on the international market.
And this is a solution, isn't it? It's for each of us to realize that we do have this kind of power, and we can make this happen.
Actually, people, even in their own buying power, as they look for local food, they might find it's more expensive, but they just have to remember that tomato I told them about. A locally grown tomato has probably got twice as much vitamins and nutrients and trace elements in it as a tomato from California and Mexico. And so effectively, you could almost pay twice as much for a local field tomato, if you can find them, than a store-bought tomato, and still have the same food value in it. So it's the quality and the nutrient value of the food we should be looking at, not how nice it looks.
Absolutely.
Well, it's funny you say that about the tomato, because like we're in our third annual. We're just starting it up there with our local supporting local calendar, and the theme of it's real living with real food. And all the pictures are of our local ethical, organic, and natural farmers, who they are, what they grow. But just above that, we put food facts. You know, how some certain foods resemble your body parts. And tomatoes, for example, red, have 4 chambers. Your heart's red, has 4 chambers. Hence, tomatoes are good for your heart. Now, of course, everything in moderation, because tomatoes are acidic, you know. But you know, and that's the part that people have forgotten.
Yeah, that's correct. And I think that you could take that just a little bit further about that tomato and tell about the antioxidants in the tomato, the lycopene, that destroys the cancer cells. If in men, they destroy prostate cancer cells. In women, it may be breast cancer, other cells. The antioxidants that are in our food is probably better than a lot of the store-bought medicine that you get from the drugstore or from the doctor. And that's when I think what you might call a survival value that the human race has had going back 10,000 years is that our body is adapted to the plants we ate as a means of protecting our health. And we've gone into the artificial medicine aspect of it, ignoring that our foods are probably our pharmacy as well as our nourishment. And so for good heart health, there's nothing better than tomatoes and your kale and your greens that you were talking about earlier.
Absolutely. Well,
yeah, well, you know, I mean, sadly, though, what's happened is the biotech industries, because Monsanto is not the only one out there. You know, these are called GMOs, genetically modified organisms, just so people know. There's at least 4 to 5 other companies out there, Dole, DuPont, Surgente, and they're now into the universities and getting into the school, and they're teaching technology as being the savior. You know, so we've still got an uphill battle. You know, so kids and young adults coming out of schools today, you know, or you know, they're all super gun ho, like, look at me, I'm going to save the world, and then they run into people like ourselves here, and be like, whoa, you know, and they're like, what's the matter? You know, what's wrong? You know, and so yeah, so I mean, it's great that, you know, we got alternative media like this that's you know, trying.
I think we're losing.
To get the information out there. So let's move.
Yeah, actually,
Go ahead.
There is an alternative to that. There's a movement now in British Columbia. It's called Farm to School and Farm to Cafeteria. And 50 years ago to 100 years ago, people they had school gardens, and they learned how to grow their own gardens. Well, the younger generation today has lost all of that. We're sort of a generation away from when everybody used to grow a garden. they're getting back to that at the schools now because the nutrition has been so bad in the schools with junk food and beverages that are sodas with chemicals and sugars in it, that they're trying to get nutritious foods at the schools. So the schools are now learning to grow their own food or have farmers produce salads for lunch that are healthier. And there's quite an awareness coming amongst school children in the schools now that are adopting this policy. So it's people can look it up. It's called Farm to Cafeteria. I've done some advisory work with them in terms of setting up some of their programs at the schools. We've got several schools doing it here in Richmond.
Well, we also have a very progressive farmer up here, and that's the one thing that we also do with Locals Supporting Locals is outside of the social media aspect, and now starting this radio show is we meet with local people, local farmers, and we actually discuss solutions. And one of the farmers up here, the Forbes farm, is actually, which is located in Oliver, is starting a school program to get kids reconnected on how food is grown. And they also want to get into teaching how to preserve, can, and all this. But and that's what we got to start doing in our communities is people need to start getting reconnected with their farmers. I know it's a little harder when you get into the bigger cities, but that's what you need to do, Yes. So just in moving forward here, because, something tells me, Harold, we could talk for hours here with all just on GMOs alone here. But when it comes to the ALR, the Agricultural Land Reserve, how did that come about, and why are we at the point now where it's actually saved the ALR? So if you can give us a little bit of background on the ALR.
The ALR, I was involved in founding the ALR. What happened way back in 1956? I was a student at UBC at the time in agriculture, as you mentioned earlier, and the local city council rezoned half of Richmond one night at council. Didn't tell anybody. My father ran a dairy farm, and we had 1,000 acres of farmland all around us, only half a dozen houses. And one night they simply rezoned us into residential. We didn't find out till a couple of years later, and I came home from university one day, and at the dinner table my father said, "I can't build a new barn and dairy, we've been rezoned." And we said, "What's that?" That's how we found out. They had a big farmers meeting in Richmond. A couple hundred farmers came out and protested, said, "We're going to pay higher taxes, we don't like what you're doing." But nobody in those days knew how to organize, and everybody went home, and eventually the farmers sold out one by one and went away. Myself and some other younger farmers got together and said, "We've got to do something about it," and we came up with the idea of setting up a land bank to stop it from happening anymore. And when I got elected as MLA in 1972, we took that idea to the government, and the Agricultural Land Reserve legislation came in. But that's how it started. It was half of Richmond zoned from agriculture to residential in one night at a council meeting.
So that was meant to save our agricultural land all over the province, and that's what's largely probably been responsible for Monsanto not moving in here as rapidly as on the prairies?
That's correct. What happened was that there was no reason to go in and buy up big chunks of farmland to take out of agriculture, so we have the most small farms in British Columbia that have survived from anywhere in the country. It was the small farms that were being rezoned, so you'd end up getting rid of the small farms and you'd simply have these big acreages, and that's where the monoculture and the GMOs are generally grown. So because we've got so many small farms, and they're the majority of the farmers that don't want that stuff, we've managed to survive against the GMO movement into the country quite well. So the two are hand-in-hand together.
Does NAFTA play into this at all?
Does which?
NAFTA?
NAFTA does as well, but so far we've been able to avoid it. But there's always a worry that, and that was a presentation I made some years ago regarding what was happening to agriculture. I made a presentation on NAFTA that we had to have municipalities exempt because our fear was that if someone was able to come in and buy farmland and convert it, that an American company come in and could demand it, and we'd have to compensate them if we didn't allow them to convert farmland to residential use. So far, we've been able to avoid that. This brings up a problem that we're having right now, is that the American system of preserving agricultural land, I call it let's make a deal. What they do if there's farmland next, believe me, that's what it is. There's a farmland next to the city. A developer buys 100 acres of farmland, goes to the city, and says, I want to build 150 acres of houses. I'll make a deal with you. I will donate 50 acres so you can save half the farmland if I can build on half. And that's the way it's done in the U.S. And so methodically, their farmland is lost half the land at a time. Here we've protected 100% of it except for exclusions that come out of the agricultural land reserve. However, we have had several instances where our BC government has tried to make a deal, and one was at 6 Mile Ranch, which is a neighboring ranch to our ranch in the Kamloops region, and one was Southlands in Delta, which is up goes before the Metro Vancouver Board on Thursday. And what they did in these cases under Let's Make a Deal was they went to the provincial cabinet, and the cabinet said, we will take your land out of the agricultural land reserve, even though the Land Commission has said you can't, as long as you give some land to the local city, as long as you provide some benefit to the community. That was in 1980 that they passed that law. It happened at Southlands in Delta, it happened at Terra Nova in Richmond, and it happened at 6 Mile Ranch in Kamloops area. After the 6 Mile Ranch fiasco, there was so much opposition that they took that right away from the provincial cabinet to remove farmland from the ALR for the benefit of the community. Bill 24 brings it back, and it makes it mandatory that the Land Commission must consider benefit to the community, not just saving farmland. So it's pretty deadly.
Wow.
Well, you know what? Speaking of NAFTA, which is actually the North American Free Trade Agreement, for those who aren't aware, there, I saw a photo here at our Penticton Farmers Market, and it showed how the farmers, when they passed that, they congregated around the community center, and they all came in with their tractors. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, because it's great being able to talk to somebody that has the knowledge that you have, because you're right in there. You're not just a city councillor. You're not just a farmer. You almost gave me faith back in politicians there with what you were saying when you were an MLA there. But with NAFTA, too, what it allowed them to do was the American government was subsidizing the American farmer, which came in to undercut the Canadian farmer, hence why we see more American produce on our shelves than we do see Canadian.
That's absolutely correct. All of that produce that comes from California, heavily subsidized. They ran irrigation canals halfway across the state. They're all dried up now, so they're running out. But for decades, we've had cheap food from the United States because of the heavy subsidies that they put on their food, which put our farmers out of business. But the point with NAFTA, however, and this Let's Make a Deal, is that once we start doing that in Canada with our own people, my fear is that American corporations come in and they can say, well, we want this piece of farmland, we want the agricultural land reserve, here's the deal, and if you don't give it to us, we'll sue you, because that's what you can do under NAFTA. And we've been fighting that for decades, but I'm really concerned that when we start adopting the American system of planning ourselves, which is what Bill 24 does by allowing the Land Commission to make deals over benefits to the community, we then could come under the umbrella of NAFTA once we start doing that, and American corporations could do the same thing. Right now, we don't allow anybody to develop farmland unless there's certain reasons, poor soil or whatever, that you can do the development. But if we open it up, I think we have problems with NAFTA.
Well, I know, and then you got the TPP that they're trying to bring in, and I'll let you say something about the TPP here. And this is why, again, I bring it back to we as local communities here have to unite again, have discussions, and hold discussions, and to talk about these trade agreements here because they are a threat to the health and the safety of the citizens, and they need to be explained exactly what's going on. You know.
I just want to ask, Harold. I just want to make sure this Bill 24. This is a provincial bill, correct?
That's right.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Sure.
Yeah, Bill 24 is the one that was just introduced last month, and it's interesting because the clause in it that tells the Land Commission they have to consider non-farm uses states that the Land Commission now must consider economic, culture, and social values, regional and community planning objectives, and other prescribed considerations, in addition to preserving farmland. So anything that some developer, some promoter comes up with will come under that economic and cultural and social value category, and they must consider it. Up until now, the Land Commission was told they were not supposed to consider it. And back in the 80s and 90s, the Cabinet was doing that and got into so much trouble they stopped doing it. So my concern is that they're trying to open the door widely to allow all kinds of development proposals to go onto agricultural land. And that's what Bill 24 is all about. And it's not an innocuous piece of legislation that the provincial government is telling us. It basically guts the Agricultural Land Act in a way that they couldn't do it before. They tried it back in the 80s unsuccessfully, but this one would be very successful.
Wow. Good to be aware of.
Yeah. The other interesting thing about it, there's a story in the Globe and Mail this morning. Apparently, the Globe put in a Freedom of Information Act request to find out the background information that the provincial government had before they drafted Bill 24, and they have 93 pages blanked out that they won't make public. So they didn't consult with farmers. They didn't consult with anybody in the business. Whoever the 93 pages are is probably who they consulted, and we'd sure like to know who that was, because it wasn't anybody in agriculture that was consulted on Bill 24. That's for sure.
I know. Yeah, I know, and that's what I always found quite funny or alarming at the same time is when they talk about doing the cabinet shuffle and they put people into other positions, and meanwhile you look at their backgrounds and they have no background in agriculture, and all of a sudden they're running agriculture. It's the same thing with the monetary and everything else, and the list can go on here. So because of our tight schedule here, and it's funny, I wasn't sure that if we could actually talk for an hour here, Harold, and something tells me we can easily talk 2 to 3 hours. And so if we can get you back on again, that would be fantastic. We want to do a wrap-up because for us here at Local Supporting Locals with the Heartbeat of the Okanagan radio show here, we want to talk to people and let them know that we are solution-oriented, and that was the purpose of having you on the show tonight here, is to show what a community can do. Because with a city like Richmond that was actually hacking their farmland to turn it around to where you're now saving the farmland, revitalizing the farmland because of removing the herbicides and pesticides. This is what progressive change is about, and I thank you so much for coming on the show here. And for example, just so people know, May 24th is a worldwide march against genetically modified organisms and Monsanto. And so in Penticton, we do have a march. In Oliver, there is a march. In Kelowna, there's a march. And that's what I know for our Okanagan part here. And people need to get out of your virtual world, get off of Facebook, Twitter, and you need to attend these events, And what we got to do is exactly what Harold is doing down with his fellow city councillors and mayor, is what they're doing, And we have to go to our city councils and get them to implement the exact same things. We got to stop the herbicides and pesticides, and we got to stop the sale of the genetically modified seeds within the city limits, within the stores, if we do that across BC, we can start to take it back. So thank you again.
Harold.
Oh, you're welcome. Come and see us in Richmond. We'll show you around.
Yes. Have a good next meeting.
Go ahead, Vicki.
Oh, I was just going to say, have a good next meeting, Harold. It was really nice to meet you.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Yes, and just as a wrap up here, so stay tuned for the next show here, because we're going to focus on genetically modified organisms, seed regulations, right up until the march against Monsanto. And then we'll start talking about other subjects here. So you can join us on our Facebook page, Locals Supporting Locals, the Okanagan chapter. You can through there you'll be able to go to our YouTube channel as well. So thank you very much. Thank you to Harold. Thank you to Vicki for my co-host here, and I think it was a great show.